Stage zero channel design. How many of you guys have heard of stage zero channel design? It's kind of a new buzz in the field right now.
Yep, even I've heard that one. Yep.
Yes, sir.
All right, so I want to talk a little bit about kind of what it is, and I'll buzz through it quickly, and then I'm going to talk some about some of the things I think we could do to investigate it more as a group in the future. So we have some very unique opportunities coming up here where channel evolution models, how channels adjust. Collin and Thorne et al. In 2013 in England came up with this idea of a new channel evolution model that was kind of circular in nature, and it had the stage zero channel. And this is that there's a whole bunch of braided wetlands that are out there, anastomosan channels, and that they should have a place in a channel evolution model and maybe be cyclical, opposed to standard channel evolution models that are kind of in a line across the page, and they may show a DA or a DA stream type, but it's just a short-term trajectory. A lot of this information came up just south of a place called Peterborough in England, and I just recently have I have a cousin that's been running some large properties over there for years. So we have an opportunity in the next couple of years where we may go over and try to look at some zero stage channel designs and try to develop regional curves related to these zero stage channels to figure out where on landscapes they should fall and develop. So channel evolution models are to organize structures of rivers. They're presented and revised, and in light of new research, they're trying to figure out how meandering channels and how braided systems are potentially different endpoints, and they're trying to understand if there's places we should add to channel evolution models. And a lot of this is related to this idea of floodplain design opposed to channel design. You know, how do we deal with these floodplain designs, channel designs, multi-threaded channel designs? And this is what this new idea of a channel evolution model looks like. Is it almost creates a group, and you have some of the same stage 1, stage 3 through 8, or stage 7. I guess stage 1 through stage 7 is the same as Simon Surtick has done for years. And then there's different places you can kind of get out of this loop and you move to degradation. But at the top of it is this idea of the stage 0 channel, which is this anastomosan wetland, wooded grassland area. And what it's trying to do is tie in the idea that, you know, we have vegetation, we have physical channel dimensions, we have channel floodplain features, substrate, and hydraulics that are all kind of tied together in these systems, and that you have different biological considerations and references for these different stages of channel. I think it's a pretty amazing idea of trying to work another type of a channel into these standard channel evolution models. I enter into this with a little bit of hesitation and a little bit of discernment, though, because like a lot of new shiny items, we see people wanting to apply it really quickly before we really understand where all of these stage 0 channels should exist. One of my questions that I have with a stage 0 channel is that if we get a shear forces that are frequent enough above a certain threshold, vegetation will not establish. The idea of anastomosan channels could not exist if shear forces go beyond a certain level. That does not come out in any published literature yet. Kevin Tweedy had mentioned about this a little bit in Headwater Wetlands years ago in his research out at NC State. And the idea is, how can we as a community start collecting data on wetlands, places where we see stage 0 channels, and say, okay, well, maybe this is one of the parameters that allow us to have a stage 0 channel. And maybe in this place, we're just going to have too high of a unit stream power, or too much of a shear stress to be able to have a braided system, or be able to have a vegetated controlled system. So in looking at regional curves, mini regional curves, a lot of times we have a place where channels begin, where we don't really see many intermittent channels or ephemeral channels below a certain stage. But I always go back to the idea that in all the mini regional curves that we've done, we haven't had a whole lot of places where we're collecting these headwater wetland features. We're still finding single thread systems, and maybe it's because they're disturbed, but I think there'll be something that we can add as a community with the research that we're doing just through our everyday projects to this idea of where is a stage 0 channel appropriate or where may it not be appropriate. And that's kind of what I'm hoping we can do in the next couple of years related to a stage 0 channel. Maybe if anybody's interested, in the next year or two, we're hoping to go over to Petersboro, maybe work with Kohler and Thorne and set up a regional curve in the Petersburg area, the 9 Bridges area of Petersboro, because it's a former bog area that's been ditched and drained years ago, and to be able to look at the idea of what was a stage 0 channel and how do you get things back to there, or how can we restore these areas back to stage 0 might be a really nice place to sit and do it. And we happen to have a lot of land that's owned by the Church of England that we'll have access to over there. So that's kind of the idea of stage 0 channels, and it's kind of a new idea, but this is the spin of where I think we want to take it as a industry. Is we have so much data we're collecting, let's start to put it in the context of stage 0 and add to research, because that research isn't available right now. It just is a really cool theory that people are jumping on. People are getting excited about these braided systems, these multi-thread systems, these beaver, these vegetation dominated systems. So any thoughts before we continue on?
So Dave, is your concern that we're not simply going far enough upstream to capture these as part of our mini regional curve efforts?
I don't know if that's so much my concern as much as that, we go upstream to wherever we find, a channel we can collect. Sometimes we'll get to a point where we've had some sort of anthropogenic change where we won't use it for a mini regional curve. But then other times we'll get to a place where we have a braided wetland. We're like, well, it's not a single thread channel, so we can't use this for a regional curve. So the idea is, as we're doing these, let's start collecting some of these stage 0 type channels if they show up. And if they don't show up, that's important data too. Let's start documenting that they didn't show up in the headwaters of any of these systems.
Okay, if we identify them and what are we going to collect on them? Are we going to do the same sort of stuff?
Yeah, I would think we'd do the same thing. I mean, it's going to most likely show up as a Rosgen classification DA system. And it's probably going to show that there's a point that's significantly higher than our regional curve. And it would probably show us a hinge point that we'd have to create on these regional curves. And in theory, that hinge point plotted over enough places could start to give us ideas of where stage 0 might be appropriate and where it probably wouldn't be appropriate.
Okay, so would you gather cross-sectional data for like the 5 or 6 channels that exist, and then amalgamate them to get an overall cross-sectional area for that D section of the channel?
Yeah, that would be my thought. And kind of like if you think of Brightingham fluids and non-Newtonian fluids, because I imagine most of you think of them on a regular basis, but it's when we think when we think of a Newtonian fluid is basically something that moves like Sir Isaac Newton thought it should move. So the apple fell on his head and water will push things downhill. And if there's a rock in the river, then water will push a rock based on a higher depth of water. A non-Newtonian fluid is like slime or plasma or something that disperses the energy within the fluid, so that if you punch your hand into slime, sometimes it will resist until you put a slow force onto it. So it's a non-Newtonian fluid. And in those, we have different regressed equations to how non-Newtonian fluids based in water work compared to how clear water works. And that's kind of what I'm thinking with the stage 0s. We're almost going to have a different relationship, and we'll get to a point where we say we don't really have a good regression for stage 0, but we do say that if you're below this range, you probably better be thinking about a stage 0. And it's kind of what Kevin Tweedy had referred to with headwater wetlands, looking at linear lengths of headwater wetlands years ago in North Carolina, but they never quite got that far. They were looking at unit stream power, but this push for the stage 0 is, it's a really big national and international push right now, and we have the potential of having a lot of people dam up large sections of rivers with the idea of trying to achieve a stage 0. Which from my standpoint, I think there's a risk associated with that we may be missing. that, you know, I'd like to help, instead of arguing against it and yelling at people, I'd like to just help collect data and see if it's appropriate or not before we get a whole bunch of these in the ground and then have to realize they're not appropriate through failures.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah.
Dave, the thing that I think from the perspective of a lot of practitioners that's missing in this stage 0 discussion is the idea that these channel types are appropriate in depositional valleys. So one of the things that I think a lot of people come out of Roslin's classes believing, and it's because he doesn't like teaching anything else, is that every river every creek we're designing has to be a transport reach. You know, they're taught to balance sediment in, sediment out, using flow set, power set as one tool to do that. And in those types of systems, it's certainly an appropriate way to do it. But not every reach is a transport reach. Some of these are depositional, and this type of sediment dynamic is appropriate for those systems. And you know, I've spoken with Brian about we're gonna try this, I think, on a couple reaches of the Klamath, of the tributaries of the Klamath when we take those dams out. There's a couple reaches that were likely stage 0 before people came in, and we've got, because of the nature of the land ownership, those set up pretty nicely for that type of approach. I think we're going to shift over. Right now, we still are looking at single threads in the current scheme, but I think we're going to probably lean over towards doing some stage 0 stuff, especially with Brian's support of it. But I do share your concern that people are going to go out and try to foist this channel form upon valleys where it's not appropriate. But I do think it may end up being an approach that works in more locations than we may realize.
Yeah, I actually see some neat potentials for it too. I mean, really, you know, some of the things that Ward Oberholzer and Art Perola are doing isn't a whole lot different than this idea of stage 0 with floodplain channel design. So, you know, you definitely look at it. I think there's going to be some things that as a group we need to get some information out there, but I do see some pretty neat applications of this as well. So.
What's interesting to me is the fish response to a lot of these projects has been tremendous. Like in the Upper Deschutes Valley, some of the work that Paul Powers and his cohorts are doing up there, the fish numbers that they're getting from these projects are really quite impressive. The problem, though, that I think with some of the work that Paul's doing is he seems to be just highlighting the shiny and not really paying much attention to those sections of the projects that are not doing particularly well, which from my understanding, and this comes a lot from Dave, is that especially at the downstream end where they're going from this anastomosing system back to a single thread, that transition is messy. And I don't know that, for one, you don't hear him talking much about those, at least I haven't. And from what Rosgan has said, I mean, he's not a huge fan of these. From what Dave has said, a lot of these projects are unraveling at the bottom end. Yeah. So I think we've got a small project here that we're gonna utilize this method on, but it's really more of a multi-threaded system to aimed at reducing shear stresses in the channel rather than a true anastomosing system that's going to be allowed to kind of walk around and occupy locations in the landscape for short to long periods of time, and then have other secondary and tertiary channels that do the same thing.
Yeah, we've done
the idea there is
we've done a couple of anastomosing channels. The biggest design one that I can remember, and we never got to the point of really building it, was Klamath, of course, with Faye Weekly and Mike Buckman back in the day.
Up there at Klamath Falls and upstream of Keno. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was really just putting back an area that was a marsh historically, and it was in that place where we're reducing our slopes so quickly that's depositional anyways. I think that's kind of the key. I mean, if you don't have a good geologic control in the downstream of one of these things, and if you don't go to a place where you get to flatter slopes, it's going to be a hard transition to hold up.
Yeah,
but,
well, It's the slopes and it's the supply as well. I mean,
Yeah.
you can do this on a steeper system if you've got the supply.
Yep.
But no, you're right. It's
Cool. So anyways,
they're going to be they're kind of here to at least stay for a while. But I think that hopefully Paul will publish a lot of their surveying data that they're monitoring data that they're collecting on these projects, both the crunchy and the smooth. You know.
Yeah, and I'm hoping we can just start to incorporate them into the thought of it into what we're doing, opposed to just kind of fighting it. Because I think there's some things that, you know, you're always going to find some things that you're probably going to be right about when you say that they're wrong, and there's other things that will say, hey, that's not going to work, and it probably will work because we didn't understand everything.
Yeah, we don't have these things licked yet.
That's right. So, good. All right. So that was the last of this. So I was just kind of ending some questions. And Mike, as you get a chance, I'll copy you on kind of when we start to put together regional curves where we're looking at these things. If we start to see things that come out, I'll make sure I'm copying you on it. Sounds like you're trying to do some of the same things with the guys at Stantec that I'm kind of hoping that other folks in Rivershared are doing as well. So
Yeah, I'd be very interested in assisting in any way I can.
Good. All right. Well, hey, before we close today, does anybody have any need for assistance this week, or does anybody want some work this week that they're looking for?
Dave, the only thing we've got going on is we're pushing hard to try and finish off the Vancouver project by Tuesday close of business. So I haven't had a chance to talk to Greg today. He's on the line, but both he and the guys at Water's Edge are pushing that together. And I gather we were going to try and open it up. Some of your interns could work on structure placement and things like that. So just keep that in your mind. Okay.
Yeah. Greg and I will be meeting up today.
Okay.
He was hitting it hard over the weekend. So if he needs help, we'll make sure the guys stick around tonight and do it.
Okay.
If not, then
Thanks.
we'll get it done.
Thanks, guys. That's it for me.
Good.
Hey, Dave, this is Stallman. Just one quick observation on your stage 0 channel studies. There's kind of an intersection between that study and the current redefinition of what a water of the United States is right now through the EPA's recent WOTUS rule, or the Navigable Waters Protection Rule, which has not yet gone into effect, but if and when it does, systems like that are driven only by precipitation will not be considered jurisdictional under the Clean Water Act. And if there's any protection for those type of systems, it'll generally only come from the state, from state regulatory authorities. So I think that the study of those systems and showing how they're important to the downstream, watershed and whatnot, and how they affect water quality will become of great interest if that rule goes forward, especially in those states that want to protect those systems. So just something to note on the regulatory side going forward.
Yeah, that's a really nice observation, Matt. I appreciate that. I'm still a bit confused by the new WOTUS stuff, but yeah, maybe this is something we can tie in. So
yeah, let me know if you ever want to go through it. I'm kind of deep into the nuances of WOTUS. I'm happy to go over that with you.
Dave, that'd be a great talk to have sometime, because I again, with me having been out of the States for a while, I'm losing touch with it. But I mean, obviously the current administration is trying to back away from a lot of things, and it sounds like they're trying to further back away from waters of the U.S.
Yeah, consider yourself lucky, Brad.
You want to know something? Every day I turn on the news, I consider myself very lucky, Mike.
Yeah, man. This clown. Wow.
So yeah, actually, Matt, that would be a great idea. If you wanted to, next time we're down in Bodark, let's kind of discuss, and maybe what we'll have you do is put together a technical talk for that 1 week, if that works for you. If you have time, just shoot me an email when you think you might have time. So.
No problem, Dave. If you just tell me when you want me to do it, I'm pretty open to do it anytime. I already have a talk developed I can throw down anytime. So just let me know when you want it done.
You want to do it next week?
Sure. Just give me the time. Is it going to be on Monday at 7 again?
Yep. Yeah, it'll be the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad to do it till next week. Don't really forget.
Yep, I won't.
Shoot me an email, and I'll be happy to do it for you.
Sounds good.
All right, done.
All right. Well, hey guys, we'll see you. Have a great week. Thanks for everybody getting on the line.
Thanks.
See you guys.
Thanks, Dave.
See you guys. Adios.